film introduced a brilliant and highly respected prosecutor named Bill. He was a no-nonsense investigator who was leading a high-stakes corruption case against a powerful circle of politicians in the presidential palace. During his investigation, he met with a former anti-corruption inspector who, in a major show of trust, gave him a flash drive containing all the key evidence against the officials. Bill, who wasn't taking any chances, immediately hid the flash drive inside his shoe for safekeeping. As Bill headed home, he felt like he had the world in the palm of his hand. He was so close to exposing the truth, but as he crossed the street, a hit-and-run driver, hired by the very officials he was investigating, slammed into him. The impact knocked him out cold. The hitman got out of the car, rifled through Bill's pockets, and took a flash drive. But the killer had made a fatal mistake. They had taken the wrong flash drive from his jacket pocket, completely missing the real one in his shoe. The next day, all of Korea was abuzz with the news. The government spokesman declared that Bill's car accident was a failed suicide attempt and had nothing to do with the corruption case, but everyone knew better. After a few days, Bill finally woke up from his coma, but the blow to his head had left him with severe amnesia. His intelligence had plummeted, and he was a shell of his former self. A year later, Bill was a completely different person. He had a hard time taking care of himself and even ate moldy food, thinking it was perfectly fine. He wore the same outfit every day, a yellow tracksuit that made him look a lot like Bruce Lee. To make ends meet, he worked a low-paying freelance job distributing flyers for adult entertainment. Despite the small salary, he was a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. One day, an old friend spotted Bill from a distance and, feeling bad for him, invited him to a restaurant. Bill, who wasn't used to a good meal, ate like a starving man, much to his friend's dismay. Bill had no idea who the man was or that he was once a genius prosecutor. Meanwhile, the film introduced a sweet and beautiful young woman named Mia, who worked as a designer in a high-end boutique. She was working on a special dress for an important client, Helen. But when Helen tried it on, it was too tight. Being an entitled woman, Helen thought Mia was laughing at her, and in a fit of rage, slapped her across the face. Mia was immediately fired. That night, Mia was heartbroken and couldn't hold back her tears. As she was crying, she was handed an eviction notice. It was Bill, who turned out to be a neighbor of hers, who often asked for help from her whenever he needed some cash. He showed her his electric bill and asked her if she could spare him some money. Mia, who was already at her wit's end, was furious with him. The next day, Mia found herself face-to-face with a couple of shady characters in front of her apartment. They were debt collectors looking for her niece, Courtney, who owed them a month's worth of debt. Courtney's parents had both passed away, so the young woman was now living with her aunt, Mia. In the middle of the confrontation, Bill came stumbling out of his apartment and noticed what was going on. Mia bravely declared that she would pay the debt herself. Then, out of the blue, Bill also said that he would help pay off the debt, much to everyone's surprise. As soon as the debt collectors left, Mia gave Courtney an earful for getting involved with loan sharks. Bill, curious as ever, tried to eavesdrop, but just as he put his ear to the wall, his own power suddenly went out. The film then introduced a real piece of work named Jordan, a loan shark and a ruthless gangster. A client who had defaulted on his loan came to his office begging for a break, but Jordan didn't care one bit. He gave the poor guy a beating and then called his doctor to have the man's organs harvested to pay off the debt. Soon after, his office manager showed up late, feigning innocence and saying he had to take care of some personal business. Jordan, who knew his employee was a gambling addict, lost his temper and gave him a brutal beating. Meanwhile, Mia's father, Greg, was finally released from prison after being imprisoned for committing theft. He was overjoyed to be free, but he was also holding a grudge against his old accomplice. When he saw his old accomplice, Norman, waiting for him, he lost his mind. Instead of a happy reunion, Greg immediately started beating Norman, blaming him for letting him get thrown in the slammer. Norman tried to calm him down by giving him a block of tofu, but Greg used it to hit Norman's face. Elsewhere, a young man named Steven was sitting in a hospital, staring into space, heartbroken and worried because his mother needed an expensive surgery he couldn't afford. Later that night, Bill went to meet Mia again. This time, he came to help. He gave her a letter to appeal her wrongful dismissal, a small gesture to make up for all the trouble he had caused her. Mia was touched and, seeing his sincerity, gave him some money to pay his overdue electricity bill. The next day, Greg and Norman showed up at Mia's apartment. With his years of experience as a thief, Greg easily bypassed the security lock and was about to get inside. Bill, still wearing his tracksuit, saw them and asked what they were doing there. Greg, in an attempt to be a responsible father, explained who he was, and Bill, in his new simple-minded way, thanked him for having such a good daughter. Soon Mia came home to find her father and his friend there and immediately blew a gasket. She was furious, having just been fired, dealing with her niece's debt, and now her deadbeat dad was back in her life. Seeing that Mia didn't want him, Courtney offered Greg and Norman a place to stay at Bill's apartment to help him with the rent. They all agreed, and that night, they were all living together in the dark, forced to use candles because Bill's electricity had been cut off. The next day, it was revealed that Helen was a close friend of Jordan. She had been funneling money through Jordan's money lending business, essentially turning him into a mob boss. A short time later, Jordan and his men were on their way to a secret safe house to deliver a huge bag of dirty money owned by Helen. Jordan's aides suggested they steal some of the money, but Jordan, who knew better, refused. He had a pretty good idea that Helen had connections everywhere and wouldn't think twice about having him killed if the money went missing. They finally arrived at the house, which was heavily guarded with surveillance cameras and designed to look abandoned from the outside. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Greg gave Bill some cash to pay the electricity bill. Bill was over the moon until he looked at his own savings and realized that Greg and Norman had stolen from him. Bill angrily went after them. There was a brief struggle with Norman, and Greg stepped in to break it up, taking the money from Norman's pocket and giving it back to Bill. A week later, Mia and Courtney were taken by Jordan's men for defaulting on their debt. But this time, Jordan was surprisingly friendly. He was clearly taken with Mia and gave them an extension, saying they could pay off the debt the next month. Courtney was overjoyed and promised to pay everything off. But as they left, Mia's gut told her something wasn't right. She asked Courtney exactly how much she owed, and Courtney explained that the debt itself wasn't huge, but the daily interest and fees had made it skyrocket. Mia then suggested that Courtney go to the bank to get a legitimate loan to pay off the loan shark. The next day, as Mia was walking past a boutique, she stopped dead in her tracks, mesmerized by a beautiful dress in the window. Just then, Jordan showed up in his car and invited her to lunch. Mia accepted, thinking she could thank him for his kindness. Shortly after, Jordan's men showed up with the very dress she had been admiring. He told her she could wear it to lunch and that she didn't have to worry about the debt anymore. Mia was overjoyed, thinking she had finally caught a break. But when they got to the point, Jordan made his intentions clear. He wanted her to be his girlfriend, and in return, he would take care of her and her family. Mia was shocked. Despite her desperate situation, she still had her self-respect. She threw a drink in his face and angrily said she would pay back every penny of the debt. That night, Mia came home to find her apartment completely ransacked and Courtney gone. Panicked, she went straight to Jordan's office. She was furious, reminding him that he had promised to give her an extension. But Jordan laughed and told her that her niece's debt, with all the interest, was now up to millions of won. As he spoke, his men came in carrying a duffel bag that was soaked in blood. Mia was horrified. She looked over at a safe, which was overflowing with wads of money, and realized that Jordan wasn't just a loan shark, but a ruthless mafia. Then in a chilling moment, Jordan showed Mia the contract Courtney had signed. It was a terrifying legal agreement stating that if the loan was not paid, the borrower would willingly have their organs harvested. Mia was horrified, but she knew she had no choice. She took out her credit card and paid off all of Courtney's debt. A week later, Jordan got his revenge. He sent his thugs to the apartment where they caused a huge disturbance, which prompted the landlord to evict Mia and Courtney and steal their rental deposit. Greg overheard the whole thing and was filled with a sense of righteous anger. He knew he had to help his daughter, even if it meant getting back into the life of crime. A short time later, Norman introduced Greg to a brilliant hacker from a major bank who turned out to be Steven, who was desperate for money to pay for his mother's surgery. The three of them gathered at Bill's apartment to plan a bank robbery. Unbeknownst to them, Bill showed up and heard everything. He immediately ran to tell Mia what he had heard, and she stormed in and confronted her father. She was absolutely furious, telling him she couldn't believe he was still stealing. She broke down, telling him that she had been so overwhelmed by her life that she had almost taken her own life. Everyone watched in stunned silence as she cried, her father's actions being the last straw. When her father finally asked what he could do to make it right, she shocked everyone by saying she would only forgive him if he agreed to one more heist. But this time, the target would be Jordan's safe. Mia, it turned out, had a knack for theft in her own right, having learned from watching her father. She took charge of the operation and led a briefing, explaining all the security systems and entrances to Jordan's office. She had already done her homework. She revealed that the safe was an old analog model and that its first number combination was 30 and 70. This revelation made Norman say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Over the next few days, the team staked out the building. Stephen hacked the surveillance cameras, and they discovered that every night, a food courier would deliver food and then come back to collect the used plates 40 minutes later. The team had a small window to pull off the job. Mia proposed a plan. Courtney would have to seduce the courier to distract him. After that, Bill would slip sleeping pills into the food. The plan was a bust. Courtney wasn't a natural at seduction, and the courier, seeing her discomfort, just left. Courtney was heartbroken that she had ruined everything, but Mia, determined to see the plan through, decided to take her place. The next night, Mia put on a daring outfit and showed off her smooth confidence. This time, the courier was completely smitten. While the courier was distracted, Bill slipped the sleeping pills into the food. Just a few moments after the foods were drugged and the guards ate it, causing them to fall asleep, Greg, Norman, and Stephen were inside Jordan's office. With his hacking skills, Stephen got past the digital locks in a flash. But the analog safe, a new and modern one he had never had his hands on, was a real pain in the neck. Greg, a veteran thief, couldn't get it open. Even with the combination numbers Mia had given him, he was a wreck. Then, in a surprise twist, Mia showed up and, with a little help from her dad, got the safe open. The team worked quickly, stuffing duffel bags with cash. But the drug guards started to wake up, and it was a mad dash for the door. Luckily, Bill showed up just in time, and with his surprising strength, took the guards down. The team got out of there with the money. Back at the apartment, everyone was over the moon as they divided the loot. Greg gave a speech, telling everyone to lie low and not spend all the money at once. But Mia, still upset with her father, decided to move out. As she was leaving, Bill ran after her, wanting her to stay. She tried to give him a bit of advice, telling him to change his clothes and not do anything that would make him stand out. He told her not to worry, that he wasn't as dumb as he looked and that he had a plan. The next day, Jordan discovered his safe was empty and was furious. His men told him to call the police, but Jordan gave them a vicious beating, saying that would be a death wish. He was fuming, knowing the surveillance camera footage was deleted, but then he noticed a hidden camera in his car. He had a glimmer of hope that the thieves were caught on tape. The plan worked, as they had a lead on the thieves. His men found Bill spending money on a new iPad, a gaming headset, and a luxury watch. They immediately brought him back to Jordan's office, where he was tied up and beaten. Jordan threatened to cut off his finger, and Bill, in a tearful panic, confessed that he acted alone. Jordan was furious, refusing to believe that such a simpleton could have pulled off such a sophisticated heist. He was about to have Bill's finger cut off when a text message came through on Bill's phone. Jordan read it and realized the entire crew's involvement. Jordan captured the whole gang and brought them to his office. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that they used the money from paying hospital bills to open a restaurant. Greg tried to negotiate, promising to rob another place for him, but Jordan didn't want to hear it. He gave them a terrifying ultimatum. Bill would be sold to work in a mine, Mia and Courtney would be sold into the sex trade, and the rest of the gang would have their organs harvested. The team, absolutely terrified, promised to do whatever he said if he spared them. Jordan took the team to Helen's safe house, showing them a room filled with a pile of cash. The house was heavily monitored by cameras and had a full-time security guard. He gave them a terrifying mission. They had 1 hour to steal the money while the security guard was on his lunch break. If they succeeded, their lives would be spared. But if they failed, he would have Mia and Courtney killed. The team, with their lives on the line, had no choice but to agree. The next day, the heist was on. Stephen successfully hacked the surveillance cameras, and Greg put Bill and Norman on lookout duty. Greg and Stephen made it into the house with the help of Stephen's hacking skills. Meanwhile, outside, Norman was getting more and more frustrated with Bill, who had no idea how to use the walkie-talkie. A senile old man then came up to Norman and started talking to him, almost blowing their cover, but Norman managed to trick the old man into thinking everything was fine. Inside the house, Stephen confidently went to work on the high-tech digital safe. He thought it would be a piece of cake, but he was dead wrong. Meanwhile, back at his office, Jordan was getting more and more anxious, waiting for a follow-up from Greg while checking his watch. He had a lot riding on this. After 30 minutes, Stephen gave up. The safe was too sophisticated, and he had no way of cracking it in time. Greg began to panic, begging him not to give up. He told Stephen that this was their only chance to save his daughter. Stephen, in a moment of desperation, borrowed Greg's phone and contacted a skilled hacker. Just then, Bill told Norman that the security guard was on his way back. Norman told Bill that they had to stop the guard no matter what. Bill ran ahead, and in a moment of brilliant absurdity, he pretended to get hit by the guard's bicycle. The guard was confused and annoyed, but Norman ran up and loudly demanded that the guard take responsibility and take Bill to the hospital. The guard reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, Stephen's contact arrived at the house. It was his mother who turned out to be a legendary hacker. She was disappointed that her son had failed but agreed to help. She told them that the security system was too complex and that the mission was too dangerous, knowing the money they targeted was owned by a big mafia. But Greg, with tears in his eyes, knelt down and begged her to try again. He confessed that he had never been a good father and that this was his last chance to make things right. Moved by his sincerity, she agreed. Sweating and struggling, she worked her magic. After several tense moments, the safe finally opened. But to their horror, the safe wasn't filled with money. It looked exactly like a regular living room, completely empty. They checked every nook and cranny, but to their surprise, they found anything but money in there. They had been set up by Jordan. Just as Greg and Stephen were about to give up, Greg heard a sound coming from behind the wall. Stephen, who was holding a water bottle, noticed that the sound got louder when he moved the bottle. They both looked at each other and then moved the bottle again, revealing a hidden room stacked from floor to ceiling with money. Even Stephen's mother, who had a lifetime of hacking experience, was left speechless. Greg, filled with a mix of relief and pure greed, contacted Jordan's men and Norman, telling them the heist was a success. At the clinic, Norman told Bill to follow him to a bathroom so they could meet with Greg, but their attempt at acting normal was a total bust, and they were almost caught. Meanwhile, Jordan's office manager overheard a phone call where his colleague beside him was planning to kill him on Jordan's orders. He stared at his colleagues, and the tension in the car grew thicker. Then, in a brutal flash, they all turned on each other. Taking advantage of the chaos, Mia and Courtney, who were tied up, freed themselves and made a run for it. The manager tried to catch them, but his luck ran out. He didn't see the incoming traffic and got hit by a truck. Back at the safe house, while stuffing their van with the money, Greg told Stephen and his mother that he was staying behind to sacrifice himself so the others could get away. He had no intention of giving Jordan all the money. He wanted to give his daughter a new life. He handed the keys to the car to Stephen, who then took off to meet up with Norman and Bill. Both Norman and Bill asked where Greg was, and Stephen's mother said that he sacrificed himself to buy them time to escape with the money. When they met up with Mia and Courtney, Mia immediately asked where her father was. When she found out that he was sacrificing himself, she told everyone to go and leave him behind. Despite her decision to sacrifice her good-for-nothing father, she actually cried over it. Back at the safe house, Greg was looking at a photo of little Mia. Just then, Jordan showed up. He was furious, demanding to know where his money was. Greg calmly told him that the money was in the car, ready to be delivered. Jordan was shocked, thinking his men had betrayed him. Greg smiled and told him that the money he was getting was only a fraction of the total. He then showed Jordan the massive room of cash. Jordan was ecstatic, and the two of them started loading the money into Jordan's car. Just as they were about to leave, Greg suddenly slammed the safe door shut, locking Jordan inside and made him the scapegoat for the missing money. Greg drove off, a smile on his face. When he finally caught up with the others, they all looked at his car, terrified that it was Jordan coming to kill them. He calmly opened the trunk, revealing the stacks of cash. Mia was completely shocked to find that it was her father, not Jordan. The two of them just stared at each other, and then Mia gave him a beautiful smile, a sign of her forgiveness. Later, the five of them met to count the money. They decided to donate a large portion of the money to orphanages and the needy. Bill, who was now a rich man, bought himself new clothes, but as he was crossing the street, he saw a car accident, and a flood of memories came rushing back. He immediately remembered what had happened to him in the past. He finally recalled that he was a prosecutor and that he had a flash drive with all the evidence against the corrupt politicians in his shoe. He went back to the apartment, got the flash drive, and went to the authorities. 1 week later, the news of the prosecutor's return and his lawsuit against the corrupt officials went viral. Mia and Courtney couldn't believe their eyes. They were speechless to see that the simpleton next door turned out to be a genius prosecutor. Meanwhile, Jordan, still trapped in the safe, was now completely at the mercy of the security guard and Helen. The crew all got together one last time, looking at their new expensive cars, knowing that they had not only gotten rich, but had also brought justice to the city. Bill, knowing they had stolen corrupt government money, decided to let it slide and let them keep the money.